This week on The Futurist, Elina Hiltunen.
I'm very scared of the future when it comes to the climate change.
Well, welcome back to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek, your co-host of The Futurists, and each week on this show, we interview somebody who is designing, planning, and inventing the future. And just before we get to this week's guest, I want to let my colleague and co-host, Brett King, do a survey of some of the recent developments on the forefront of the future. So over to you, Brett. Give us a quick wrap-up.
Thanks, man. Well, there's this continued debate, of course, in the community writ large, the scientific community, about what effect artificial intelligence is going to have on society. Those like Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis think artificial intelligence is going to create this world of abundance. But we've had people like Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk frame their concerns about this. So the question is, what do AI researchers and scientists think about the potential upside versus downside of artificial intelligence? Well, a recent survey of AI researchers around the world agree that AI decision-making could cause catastrophic outcomes. What percentage? About 36% of AI researchers think like that. So this really tells us we need a plan in terms of how we should be integrating artificial intelligence into our society. And as we've discussed numerous times on the show, it probably starts with ethics. Secondly, I wanted to talk about the fact that there is a lot of activity with NASA going on at the moment. They're about to try deflecting an asteroid by crashing in a spacecraft into an asteroid.
What can possibly go wrong with that?
yeah, exactly. But this asteroid is not going to pass anywhere near Earth. Its closest distance is about 7 million kilometers from Earth. So we'll see where that happens. And of course, we just saw the James Webb Space Telescope release photos of Neptune with its ring system, which is pretty cool. But the last one I'll leave you with is in terms of self-driving tech, Volvo has introduced their new electric car, and it won't let you drive if it detects you're drunk. So, this is some of the tech that I think is going to be a stopgap before we get to full autonomous cars.
Maybe you come in sideways that way, one step at a time. Yeah. Well, thanks for that quick roundup, Brett. This week's guest is coming to us from Finland, where she's the author of a number of books and the CEO of What's Next Consulting. So, Brett, let's welcome Elina Hiltunen to The Futurist.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi.
Happy to be here.
Great to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
So, is a Finnish futurist ever finished? Sorry, that's a bad joke.
No, that was almost a joke. yeah.
Almost a joke. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We love to have guests join us from other places because, as the old adage goes, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And in some ways, Finland is living in a future that it certainly wouldn't have chosen. Circumstances beyond your control are sort of dictating what happens around your borders, and even kind of a significant change to your borders. Can you give us a quick view of what's happening right now that's going to shape the future for Finland?
Well, we are trying to join NATO, and I think that we are on the way to NATO, and people are very happy about that here in Finland. But still, when we think about Finnish military, we have been prepared for Russia for decades because we have had our two wars with Russia in 1940s. So since that, of course, we have noticed that we have a challenge with our eastern border. So we have been prepared for that always, all the time. And we have had this threat. And Finnish military is there, and we have this. People are very happy to defend their country here in Finland. When there have been some research studies about how willing people are to defend their countries, Finland is in the top. So we
It
are
makes
very
sense.
happy to prepare.
Historically, Finland has been stuck between two difficult neighbors, right? Between Russia, of course, and centuries of domination by the Russian Empire. But also, there's a period of time where Sweden, your neighbor on the other side, also dominated. So you got to be tough to live in that neighborhood, I guess.
Well, we are very good friends with Swedish people and Sweden. So, for example, when it comes to the military, we are doing a cooperation. And I think the Baltic Sea is the most important thing here when we think about the defense of Finland. It's not necessarily the border, but Baltic Sea.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The other element of this is like I've noticed in a lot of your writing, Elina, you talk about climate as a key element of defense strategy. In the United States, where Rob and I are today, of course, the US Defense Department was quite vocal in terms of climate risk, dismissing the climate denial, for a couple of decades now, really identifying it as a key strategic risk for the United States and counting as a defense, as part of their defense strategy. So why does climate align with defense, as a sort of a natural thing these days that we see when it's talked about?
Yes, it's not only the climate change that is causing threats and something to think for armies. It's also the biodiversity, loss of biodiversity that is problematic. And these are the two things that are really causing problems all around the world. And if we think, for example, climate change, it's causing the rise of the sea level, which is meaning that many of the cities are located next to the sea, and then there is going to be more and more climate refugees. And this is causing security challenges for many countries. And of course, there might be wars over fresh water, for example. And if you think that people are going to lack food, lack water, fresh water, so this is something that is causing security threats, really big security threats. This is actually something, as a futurist, when I'm talking about the future of whatever, future of health, future of traveling, future of logistics, future of technology, digitalization, I always start my speech about climate change and biodiversity loss, because they are the biggest threats of the humankind. And the thing is, the planet is surviving without human beings, but we are not surviving without the planet.
That's right. That's a good point. The planet will carry on.
Yeah.
There may be different life forms here, even if we end up killing ourselves. How does climate change affect Finland in your particular region? Is that how does it manifest in the north?
Well, actually, Finland is one of the places that climate change is affecting very much, and the average temperature has been rising 4 times more than the average temperature all around the world. So the temperature is rising here, and I live in the southern part of Finland, and the challenge here is that we used to have beautiful white winter times, and now it's totally black because we don't have the sun here. It's really dark here, and usually we had the white snow, but not anymore. We have a couple of months maybe the snow here in the southern part of Finland, but when I was a child, it used to be from November to March, we had the snow here, but now it's maybe January, February, and that's it. And it has really affected, and it's affecting in many levels. One of the examples I'm saying to my customers about climate change is usually we think about the extreme weathers and melting of glaciers and these kind of things, and which is happening and which are very big things. But once I was going to one of my speaking gigs, and I was waiting in the railway station, and I was looking at the LED display, very big LED display, and it was actually broken. And then there was a sign in the LED display that because of the summer, the last summer was the hottest summer since 1937, this LED display was broken because of the heat. And this is something I'm saying to my customers. Think about this. These are the small things that are really affecting to your own business environment. And what are they? And these can be really big things for you. And it's not the climate change that it's only these big extreme weather and rise of the average temperature. It's the small things that are going to affect every organization.
Yeah, that's certainly true. The world's changing in incremental ways, but they add up to big changes eventually.
Definitely, yeah.
What kinds of companies do you typically provide advice to?
Well, they are from different industries and different areas, and they are like government institutes and really like companies, and maybe the biggest companies here in Finland. I've been visiting every of those and having my lectures and speeches.
Why do they need a futurist? What is the reason for hiring a futurist?
I really hope that they listen to me when I'm having my speech, and I'm not only the clown having some entertainment for them. I'm quite humorous when I'm having my speeches. So it might be a little bit like combination of stand-up comics plus futures, but there are actually serious things that we have to consider when we think about the future. And that's why I a little bit add humor on that, because otherwise it would be so sad stories about the future. But okay, they want to listen my views of what is happening in the future. And this is something that I do. I look at information, what is happening now, and think about how could this be in the future, and what are the threats and possibilities and so on. So one thing is that I really go to different companies, have my keynote speeches, but then I work with the strategy with many companies, and I have my own methods how to do the strategy work with my clients. And it is very systematic, as I am an engineer from my background, so I'm very systematic. I'm a crazy person too, very creative, but I'm very systematic too.
So would you say you're an optimist? Because most futurists, I think, are generally optimistic, but a lot of stuff we see in depiction of the future is dystopian. So you'd say pessimistic.
I'm a pessimistic optimist.
What does that mean?
I hope for the best, but fear for the worst.
Well, that makes sense given the times that we're in. That
sort of describes me and Robert together.
Okay, very good combination.
Right,
you really have to have the positive somewhere. You have to have the hope for the future. That I think is very important, and that's why the optimistic. But then I see that there are really big challenges that the humankind is facing now. So we have to do something, and that's why I won't shut up when I go to companies. I will tell that these are the really big issues here. So do something. This is your responsibility too.
Now, how do you know that those are big issues? The issues that you're pointing to. How are you so certain that those are the issues that matter?
There's one word answer to that: science.
Oh, so you have a scientific methodology for forecasting?
No, I don't have. One thing is that I don't forecast the future. That is something that I don't do. I don't forecast the future. I anticipate different futures, and it's not only one future. So it's not forecasting, it's thinking of different futures. My idea here is that we can't forecast. Nobody can forecast the future. And forecast can actually be quite dangerous, because when people hear this forecast, some president is saying that this is happening, and everybody is listening to him and or her and thinking that because he's the president, he probably knows that things are going to be that in the future. And then we might end up in the situation that people are only seeing this forecast happening and missing all the other signs of the change. And then the change can be very surprise for these big companies.
So you're saying scenario modeling, right?
Yes, definitely scenario modeling. Yeah. But you were asking that how do I know that these are the big things? Because I trust in science. I read very much, and I know what scientists are talking about the climate change, what scientists are talking about the biodiversity loss. And so that's why I know that these are the big things.
What are some good sources of information? Like, where do you find this stuff that keeps you up to date?
Well, I have to say that thank you for asking that because I'm really like information freak. Well, there are, for example, World Bank, United Nations, United Nations, and all the statistics they have, for example, the estimation of the growth of the world population. Then one of my favorites is Our World in Data, these web pages. And well, as you can see, I try to seek for statistics of what is happening. And then, of course, I try to look at all different kind of like scientific magazines and Nature, for example, Scientific American. And that's one example. And then, of course, I read the Finnish scientific, like popular magazines. And these are some of these sources. But
do you have your own? Do you have your own framing for this? You must take all that information in and then put it into your own context or your own hypothesis, right?
Yeah. Well, I have my frame in my head, so I'm like sucking all the information around the from different sources, and then I'm organizing that in my head, and then I have my ideas of what could happen in the future. Actually, I could say that when you are asking that, do I have some like frame or method for the future? Mm-hmm. I have one formula for the future, as I am an engineer. So it's very good that to have everything in formulas. For example, I have a formula. What is life? Do you want to hear what is the formula for life?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Death minus birth. Death minus birth. So, okay, but probably you want to hear my formula for the future. So, anticipating the future equals facts plus imagination.
Right.
Facts plus imagination.
That's
so
nice.
So the idea is that you really have to look at the facts of today and the history, what are happening now, and then you add some imagination. So that's why actually I'm a fan of science fiction, because in science fiction you trust the facts, what is happening in science, and then you add the imagination. That's why I write science fiction. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that because the science view is obviously very helpful for scenario planning, but it's going beyond that and imagining the details of the world in those scenarios that science fiction is very good for. So, I think that's an important element of sci-fi and how it sort of reflects our view of the future for sure. Yeah. When we talk about the science fiction you do, what sort of time periods are you dealing with? How far in the future? We had David Brin on recently, and of course, and Gareth Powell was a guest recently as well. And they're talking about thousands of years in the future in many cases.
Only some 10 years, and actually, I have one science fiction book published by my own publishing house, and the name of the book was On That Day, 2000 X9. So X9. So I didn't say which decade it is, but some decade in 2000.
So at this point in the show, what we'd like to do is ask you a series of quick questions, and the answers can be very brief. So, Brett, how about if you take it away with the lightning round and give us a few quick questions with short answers?
Okay, yes. Cool. Here we go. So, Elina, what was the first science fiction you remember being exposed to on TV or books?
Back to the Future.
Back to the Future. Okay, cool. When did you first realize that the future was what you wanted to base your career
on? 25 years ago.
So what was it where the penny dropped?
It's a long story.
Okay. All right, cool. Name a futurist that has influenced you and why.
Sohail Inuatullah, and he was actually the opponent of my PhD thesis about weak signals.
Very cool. When you think about different futurists you've been exposed to, what's the best prediction you think a futurist has ever made, or the best forecast?
I think that good futurists don't do any forecasts.
You're
of
the second.
predictions.
You're the second futurist that said that. Actually, we had was Brad Templeton, wasn't it, Rob?
Yeah, it leaves me scratching my head thinking, well, then
Yeah.
what kind of futurist are you?
But
Yeah.
I guess it's the word forecast versus
It is. It's the prediction and forecast. Yeah,
forecast is a prediction of the future.
There's a pretty big
foretelling.
distinction
yeah.
there.
And we don't try to predict. We are not fortune tellers.
Yes,
we are futurists. Yeah.
What science fiction story is most representative of the future you hope for?
That's a difficult question. I think that my science fiction stories.
That's a diplomatic answer. And what future technology do you most hope for?
Synthetic biology.
Yeah,
Very cool.
Me too.
Cool.
Well, great. On that note, I think it's time for us to take a little break. You're listening to The Futurists, and this week our guest is Elina Hiltunen, who's joining us from Finland. Stay tuned, because we're going to be back in just a few minutes.
Welcome to Breaking Banks, the #1 global fintech radio show and podcast. I'm Brett King.
And I'm Jason Henricks. Every week since 2013, we explore the personalities, startups, innovators, and industry players driving disruption in financial services.
From incumbents to unicorns, and from cutting-edge technology to the people using it to help create a more innovative, inclusive, and healthy financial future. I'm JP Nichols, and this is Breaking Banks.
Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm your host, Brett King, with my good friend, Rob Tercek, sitting in the hosting chair. And before we jump back to Elina Hiltunen, who we've been talking to, the Finnish futurist, I wanted to do just a quick deep dive, if I could, into some of the battery technologies we're looking at for grid-level storage, because we've got Ramez Nam coming up in a couple of weeks, and Mez is one of the top guys at Singularity talking about energy. But with all of the talk about grid failures around the world, you know, we have Europe under pressure because of the Russia-Ukraine situation and the energy situation coming out of Russia with the pipelines and so forth. But we also have news of grids under threat all around the world right now. We hear about California's grid under threat, Texas under threat. London is potentially going to have brownouts in London, during this winter, as well as in Australia, in the states of Victoria and New South Wales. We already see projections of grid failures there, similar to what happened in South Australia a few years ago. Now, in South Australia, the solution to this, you may remember, was a big bet that Elon Musk made with the South Australian government to help their grid or strengthen their grid through the use of a Tesla battery farm linked to their solar generation and renewable capability. Now, Elon Musk made this bet that he would, if he could do this within 100 days, I think it was, that South Australia would have to pay for him. But if he couldn't get the battery farm up and running in that period, then they would get it for free. So he was successful, and they did an initial 130 megawatt hour battery farm and have since expanded on that, adding another 65 megawatt expansion. And they plan to double the size of that battery farm again in the near term because it's been so successful. This has led to the grids in New South Wales and Victoria also adopting battery farms. In fact, one of the world's largest battery energy storage system, powered by Tesla, began operating in the state of Victoria back in December of 2021. And it can power, or the battery storage has enough power for more than 650,000 homes for an hour. Now, why this is important is because previously what those energy grids would have to do is have online generation capacity built with around gas-fired turbines to rapidly generate energy in the case of load balancing issues. This is what caused the South Australian grid to fail when two tornadoes broke out in South Australia. I didn't even know South Australia had tornadoes, and that's there. But we see Texas Texas now getting 15 utility scale battery storage sites. We see California has launched a number of battery storage facilities there, 2,500 Tesla Powerwalls in a plant to deliver 16.5 megawatts of storage energy in just one battery farm there. So the question is, what is the technologies we're going to use for these types of batteries? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. We're using lithium-ion batteries right now, but some of the new technologies we're looking at are not actually based on lithium-ion, but are based on some much simpler technologies, like the use of salt, molten salt, and the use of seawater and things like this for much lower cost grid level energy storage. But the real change that's going to be interesting here is that if we're looking at renewable resilience for climate proof or future proof energy grids, we are going to have to change the way we think about grid design. So battery storage isn't going to be like these massive generation facilities that we have, which are centralized on the grid. They're most likely going to be distributed systems where these batteries are stored in multiple locations in cities, in homes, and so forth to make the grid more resilient. It's a big shift in the way we think about grid design for energy resilience. So we'll see what Mez has to say about that in a few weeks when he's on the show. Back over to you, Rob.
Looking forward to hearing that. It's interesting. Your brief report there ties together a bunch of the trends and topics we've been talking about on the Futurists for many weeks. Certainly, decentralization has been a theme that comes up again and again, particularly with regard to Web3. But here we're talking about a kind of decentralized power grid. And of course, that power grid is necessary because the climate itself is changing. And so as the climate changes, the need for energy has also been evolving. And so that's forcing governments around the world to contend with the notion that a new kind of power system is required to deal with a new kind of climate. That brings us back to the topic that we were talking about just before the break with Elina Hiltunen, who's our guest. She was telling us a little bit about climate as a major threat, something that's undeniably going to be in the future, and it's going to shape the future, and that her clients need to be prepared for. Let's return to that topic. So welcome back. Thanks, Elina, for waiting for us as we took our break.
Thank you. And I was actually listening to this battery story, and can I tell some little detail?
Yeah, please, sure.
Yeah, in Finland, we are actually starting to create batteries from wood.
Wood?
Like nanocellulose. Yes,
okay.
from wood.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't mention graphene because that's another tech, obviously, that would use.
Yeah. But tell us about nanocellulose.
Well, it is something that we are starting to make this. I was just reading one article here that we are, well, I don't know more about the technology, but I know that there are some research and development processes how to make these batteries from nanocellulose and from wood. Mm-hmm. And because we in Finland, we are living from the forest. So the forest industry is one of the biggest industry here.
Yeah.
So
no shortage of wood in Finland. That's for sure true.
No, not yet, at least. Yeah. So this is one of the inventions that Finns are doing. We really have quite nice ideas. Actually, then we made from wood, from birds. Actually, I think this sugar called xylitol. I don't know if you have heard about this xylitol.
Yeah. We call it xylitol here.
Yeah. So we use it's a Finnish invention, and it's good for your teeth. So actually, in daycare, the little kiddies are having the chewing gum, xylitol chewing gum after every meal.
So it's better for you than sugar.
Yeah, that's good for their teeth.
That's cool. Well, it's smart to use the resources that you've got at hand. One of the other forces that shapes the future is geopolitical tension. And of course, to build the lithium-ion batteries, those rely heavily on rare earths. And we all know where rare earths come from. And so these days, everyone's wondering, can we be so dependent? Can we afford to be so dependent on a country that might not be looking out for our best interest in the near future? And so that's forcing countries to consider alternatives, whether that's batteries built with nanocellulose or using things like salt and seawater.
and graphene. Graphene is actually something that I have been expecting to boom already. When I was writing my book about future of technology, and it was published in 2014, I was already writing about possibilities of graphene in the book. And yet, come on, 8 years after, and this has
well, this is where
yet.
I think carbon sequestration is obviously going to lead to more graphene development, because it's the obvious use of the carbon sequestration byproduct is to create graphene batteries and the buckyballs and all of those exotic materials, nanotech.
I heard they were having trouble manufacturing graphene at scale. Is that correct?
Yeah. There's a new modified application, graphene with a Y, which is a new process they're working on. It is at scale is the big problem. But if we're going to build a space elevator, we need graphene, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and that's imminent, I'm sure.
I think we might have to wait for a couple of years, decades or centuries maybe, for the space elevator. Yeah, but I've been writing about that too. So yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But some of the things in the near future that you were just speaking about a moment ago, I think we might want to revisit because those seem imminent and very real. You talked about climate refugees, and you spoke about the prospect of a water war, a battle over freshwater supplies. And while there's probably an abundance of fresh water in Finland, that's just not true in other parts of the world. And so we're already seeing tension in the Middle East, problems arising in India. The control of the Himalayas is a big issue between India and China, because that's basically the water tower for South and East Asia.
Yes, and then the glaciers are melting there, and this is causing the challenges. More water at the first, but later on there will be big challenges with this.
And this summer we saw some of the big rivers in China run nearly dry. Water levels were dropping drastically. Also true in Europe. The Rhine River and the Seine were both at historically low levels this summer. The Rhine was even closed to traffic at one point. It's the busiest river in the world for industrial traffic. So these issues are not really lying out in the future. They're quite clear now.
Yeah,
what do you anticipate in the next 5 years? How will this problem get worse? Was this hot summer the coldest summer we're going to have for the next 5 years?
I'm very scared of the future when it comes to the climate change and biodiversity loss. And the humankind is expert in messing around here in this world and polluting the world. It's not only the climate change, but if we're thinking about, for example, the pollution, 99% of the world population are living in the areas where the air quality is poor. 99%. And we are dumping like 80%, from used and wastewater, not treated, so untreated. 80% of the water is poured back to the lakes and seas without any treatment. 80%. And the numbers are like amazing. So we have really challenges, and I think the one big challenge is because we think all we think about is economic growth.
We've traded off profits for the lives of humans, because let's face it, 10 million people die every year from pollution, air quality pollution. Yes. We're not talking fossil fuels and its role in climate here. We're just talking about deaths from air pollution, air quality.
Actually, fossil fuels are one reason of the deaths of the air pollution. Yeah.
And we, you could argue that we had the technology to in the 70s. We could accelerated solar and renewable energy production. If our priority was society and the health of our citizens, then we would have prioritized that over burning fossil fuels, and we didn't. So we made a decision to trade off human lives for fossil fuel profits. And that is, I think, that says a lot about the heart of the problem with capitalism in a climate-aware world, that the world is going to, if we push for sustainability and things like that, we're going to have to change our view of capitalism. I think that's pretty necessary.
There was one really interesting article about green growth, and this is something that is discussed now. Is it possible to have green growth so the economy will grow and we will be sustainable? Is it really possible, or is the growth always the thing that we should achieve, or should we degrowth or decrease the economy? Would this be one of the options? I don't have the answers for that.
Negative growth,
but,
which would
negative
right?
growth. Yeah.
Economic contraction.
But I think that there is still hope. I want to believe that there is still hope, and there are very good examples with the good achievements that the human kind has had. For example, when we think about the ozone hole in the ozone layer.
We were successful at addressing
we were
that.
successful, and actually we had the was it Montreal Agreement about that, and where the CFC compounds were forbidden to use. And that was actually one very good agreement when we think about the climate change, because the CFC compounds are much worse when we think about the carbon dioxide or methane, when we think about how much they are warming the climate. So that was actually something that we have done. And to be honest, I'm very happy that today now the President of the United States is really thinking about the climate change. Thank you for that. I was so happy about the Paris Agreement.
I found an interesting fact yesterday, actually. Vultures are a big contributor to reduction in CO2 emissions because they eat all of the decaying animals. So there you go. I didn't know that. But
yeah.
That's our solution.
You talk. Yes, we need more vultures. Obviously,
I thought we had enough on Wall Street.
Yeah, I knew that was coming too.
Yeah.
Elina, you talked also about the eco-refugee situation, and we've seen some varying estimates to this. 300 million to over 1 billion eco-refugees, some as high as 1.6 billion. Europe has had to deal with refugees over the last few years with the Syrian crisis and so forth. But, we're talking about a scale of influx of immigrants that we've, that isn't even equivalent to what we saw during the Second World War or things like that. It's just almost mind-blowing. How is that going to change this issue of global governance? You talked about the CFC, the Montreal Accord and things like that, where we came together. We're obviously going to need to come together. How do we solve this problem of eco-refugees, or how do you think the planet's going to respond?
Well, that's a good question. If I would have the answer for that, I would be very happy. But I think that actually one way to cope with that is to really act on the climate change now and to try to find the solutions. We have to adjust to the climate change, but we have to prevent for it to happen and to really we have the means. We know how to do that. So we have to change from fossil fuels to renewable fuels, and that's one way. And then we have to, for example, plant trees and forests. So these are the two ways to do that. And then we, of course, have the technological solutions, but I wouldn't want to go there when we are thinking about climate engineering, because that's a risky business, I would say. We can't know what is happening if we are putting sulfuric acid to the fuel of airplanes and putting that to the air. So that is one way to do that. But
right.
I wouldn't want that to happen. Yeah, that would be really
this geoengineering is obviously something that we are already doing, but we've got to switch the intent to being positive, geoengineering
that's
rather
true.
than
That's true.
incidental, right?
Yeah.
There's a great book called The Ministry of the Future by Stanley Robinson, and he gets into a lot of these potential, areas of geoengineering. Hopefully, we'll get him on the show soon.
Hey, Robert and Brett, can I now say a little bit about my background? Because I want to tell you what's in my background. My background is in chemical engineering. So a Master of Science in that. And then I did my PhD thesis about weak signals. And that was about future, so weak signals in organizational futures learning. And now I'm doing my second PhD to the National Defense University of Finland, and it's about how to use science fiction in national defense organizations' anticipation process. So that's my background.
Wow. I want to clarify for the listeners that you were talking, when you said weak signals, you meant weak signals.
Weak, yeah, sorry
weak
about
signals.
my pronunciation.
No, that's okay. It's okay.
I can
it's
say
just,
it in Finnish, it's heikot signaalit. In Finnish.
Let's talk a little bit about signal theory and information, because quite a lot of what you're referring to when you talk about climate change and planning for the future is very dependent on information, and in particular, information hygiene. You know, the idea of keeping your information clear, having reliable information, reliable facts. But I think it's safe to say that here in the United States, but also in many other countries around the world, facts have been under assault. Facts have been under a kind of, there's been a kind of siege on the world of facts. Before the break, you shared with us a formula for thinking about the future. You said that the future can be envisioned as facts plus imagination. And I love that idea because it brings in that kind of creativity. When you get into forecasting and strategy and planning and scenario planning, it relies a little bit on imagination, right? Because you have to come up with ideas. Maybe it's a range of different scenarios. So that's for sure the methodology we use. But let's be clear, that methodology is in jeopardy when we don't have solid facts that we can all agree upon. And let's add one more notion here. The assault on information. In the United States, we often will attribute it to adversaries, countries like Russia or perhaps China. We say, oh, they're the ones that are polluting our environment with fake news. But let's be really clear. This has been a function of fossil fuel companies for many years preceding geopolitics. The fossil fuel companies filled us with disinformation about climate change. They did everything they possibly could to minimize the threat, and then sometimes it presented completely implausible alternative scenarios just to clutter the atmosphere and confuse people. Talk to me a little bit about the world of disinformation as viewed from Finland, because I know this has been a big issue in the whole Nordic region, not just Finland, but also in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and all the way in Poland. You've been at the forefront, I guess, of an information war for many years.
Yeah, well, I have to say that when we think about information war or information influence operations, so there's no border in that. It doesn't, there's no border now in this world because we have the internet, so it's affecting to every one of us. And I would say that you in United States have had your part from Russian information influence in 2016, definitely in your presidential elections. And that is saying how effective way that is to influence. And when we are thinking about and when I'm studying now military studies and thinking about how to wage war in the future, it's about it's not only in the air or sea and land. It's also cyber and information influence. Then it's also space. So we have different dimensions when we are thinking about how to wage a war. So information influence is actually something that I wrote my latest scientific article. It was about how to use science fiction to think about future information influence operations in war. And that was quite a nice article. But really, yes, that's a big problem, I think, everywhere in the world. And but one thing that I'm very actually trustful is that when people have the education level high, they might have better tendency to recognize that this is actually not true and this is true. So I think in that sense also the education is one tool for fighting back for this information war. And that in Finland we are very good in education, I would say.
No, I the Nordics generally, I think, have got a really good approach to education and quite innovative, beyond the sort of industrial age model of education that we have in the West. I am reminded of the Socrates Plato story of the state ship, actually, which was talking about the philosopher king. But Thomas Jefferson used that to say that actually the best way to have a democracy in the United States was to have highly educated citizens, and that's why education should be free, because that would maintain a informed discourse around policy.
Yes, and welcome
we've
to
lost
Finland.
that.
And welcome to Finland, because education is free here. When you go to university, it's totally free. That's why me, as a child of a parents who didn't have education almost at all, I'm doing my second PhD thesis here in Finland.
Oh.
And that's a good thing here, because you don't have to pay for the education at all. It's free. It's free for everyone. No matter if your parents are rich or poor, it's free for you.
I think that's an economic advantage, personally. I think free education
this is a one good
is
way
core
to
infrastructure. But that's my view.
Here in the United States, we have one approach to everything. We have one answer for every problem, which is the free market will solve the problem. And so instead of making education freely available to everyone, or healthcare, making that available to everyone, which is what a lot of industrialized countries do. Wealthy countries do provide those things. Here in the United States, we relinquish it to the free market, which is a chance for someone to profiteer. And frankly, that brings us right back to disinformation, because as soon as you have people with a vested interest, they're going to start to pollute the information ecosystem with information propaganda that favors their interest. So here we have it. We got this kind of hairball. At the heart of all these matters is you got to have some pure information in order to make a good decision. And when you have muddled information or facts that are in dispute, then it's very difficult for society to grapple with that and come to a determination that everyone can agree with. That is a big challenge. Elina, if you could, we love to have our futurist guests talk to us about the far future. And I realize your focus is much more practical, pragmatic on the near future, but go with us for a second. Indulge us, please. Share with us your vision for a future out there. What gets you most excited? You talked about synthetic biology, for instance, as a technology you're keen on. Give us a forecast, if you will. Go for it.
Well, I will tell about my latest science fiction book, because in that there was a forecast about future, and actually it was a book that there was a storyteller, and it was a quantum computer, artificial intelligence. When we are thinking about the artificial intelligence, it's very good to combine that with the idea of quantum computing, which is then like exploding the issue of artificial intelligence. But this quantum computer was really affecting to people's lives. It was reading people's minds and ideas, and it was also affecting to people's dreams when people were sleeping. So people's dreams.
Wow.
And so this was the story. And I hope that this, I would call it like artificial quantum entity in the future, would be kind to people. That's the positive future, and solve our big problems.
You know, it's interesting because there's a lot of research about consciousness right now that thinks that consciousness has a quantum effect or is a quantum effect, and so you wonder whether to get super intelligent AIs, are we going to need to integrate quantum with AI? Because right now we're a fair way off from that. I don't know of any researchers working on quantum AI right now, but maybe that's something we should research.
But that's really a big thing in the future. And the second thing is really this synthetic biology. How could that change our future?
And for the benefit of our audience, tell me what you mean when you say synthetic biology. For the benefit of the audience, just give us a definition.
Synthetic biology is like, well, we could call that extreme gene manipulation. But this is something combining we could like create new creatures by synthetic biology.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, with the synthetic biology, I could have my dog glowing in the dark. And if I go to the black winter Finnish winter night outside, and I have my black Labrador Retriever, and it would glow in the dark.
Great.
And we could.
That is a very Finland-specific use case, I have to tell you.
Yes.
I remember working in Finland at one point in February, a long time ago, and it was like super dark all day.
Yeah.
And I said to one of the engineers I was working with, I said, "What time does the sun come up?" And he said, "April."
Yeah, that's true. But then when
I was going to say, do you think that? Do you think that Finland will breed reindeers with glowing red noses?
Well, actually, yeah, that would be. There are actually these spray things that you can spray on the reindeer and it will start to glow in the dark. So, yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Fun fiction, fun vision of the future. Elina Hiltunen, thank you very much for joining us on the show. It has been a great pleasure to hear your perspectives. Always interesting to get voices from other places outside the United States. Sometimes people think that, at least Americans think that we decide the future. That's not really always the case. The future unfolds differently in different places, and it's useful to get those perspectives. Thank you very much for joining us today on The Futurists.
Where can people find out more about you, Elina?
www.elinahiltunen.com. That's my web pages.
Great.
Or
we'll put that in the show notes.
www.whatsnext.fi is the second
cool.
one.
What's next?
Yeah, I have the What's Next Consulting, so this is my company.
Nice.
Yeah,
very cool.
Brett, before we wrap up, I wanted to point out one more thing that's actually quite exciting. Two of our previous guests, Tony Parisi and Mark Pesce, who both spoke to us about 3D worlds and the metaverse, have released a new podcast, and I've checked it out, and it's really quite good. So I recommend that folks who are listening check out A Brief History of the Metaverse, which is available as a podcast on all your regular podcast outlets from two futurist guests that joined us on this show in the past, Mark Pesce and Tony Parisi. So do check it out. If you get a chance,
Fantastic.
Go download the short history of the metaverse. And
awesome.
And thank you for asking me to come here. It has been very nice to talk with you.
It's always good to get futurists together. We love to talk about the future. That's why we chose to do this podcast. Thanks for joining us this week, everybody. If you like the podcast, don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or Google Play or Podcaster, Stitcher, wherever it is that you download to Spotify, wherever it is you download your episodes from, leave us a review. That helps other people find the podcast and, or publish it on social media. Give us some comments, tell us who you'd like us to interview next or what topics you'd like us to cover, and we'll go find futurists in those particular areas. A quick shout out of thanks to our team that helps us put the show together each week: Lisbeth Severins, Kevin Hersham, Sylvie and Carlo on the social media side, and the team at Provoke who help us put it together, as well as the team behind us supporting us on The Futurists. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you in the future.
Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.